This is the Spirit and Wellness Show. News and information from a higher perspective. With your host, Harry Wilkinson. Hello, and welcome to the Spirit and Wellness Show. I am Harry Wilkinson, and this is the show where we take a look at the days and weeks events, happenings in the world around us. That includes politics, the environment, technology, everything that we hear about or interact with on a daily or weekly basis. And we take a look at it from a higher perspective. We look at the stories that we are creating, and we take that step back with the knowledge, with an understanding that we are creating them at the very highest level of who we are. And creating them so well that we've forgotten that we actually are creating them, and they take on a life of their own. And it feels as if they are something outside of us, something we haven't encountered before, something unique, scary maybe, challenging is another word. But these are all our own creations. And when we own that, and when we understand that, and we take that step back with mindfulness, perhaps meditation, it leads to this greater understanding, this sense of connection and connectedness, and this sense of empowerment that allows you to see through what is ultimately illusory. Those things that often push buttons for us, seem problematic, give us anxiety or give us concern, and we can look through them. I hate to say rise above, although that is what it sort of is, but transcendence is another word. Transformation is another word. But when you begin to do this with, well, not just news stories or things that are happening in the world, but really anything in your world, in your life that gives you that feeling or sense of troubledness. When you engage in this and you recognize the truth of who and what you are, and that you are creating this for a reason, and the reason is always your own awareness and your own growth, then you begin to have tools with which to deal with what might at first seem a bit overwhelming when you turn on the radio, or you look at your smartphone, or you log on to your social media and you get pounded by all kinds of what might appear to be negativity. But you now have the tools to go in there. You have the tools to go in, recognize the truth of the stories that we are creating, and take the energy back from them. And in doing so, as I said, it gives you a sense of transcendence. It's an illuminating process, and something that I think is going to be, if it's not already, certainly will be more and more incumbent upon everyone to have some sort of tools in their tool belt to do. So today, and over the past few months, we've been talking about one way that seems to be helpful for people to achieve this state of mind. We talk about meditation all the time on this show. We talk about mindfulness, and we've been talking recently about the clinical trials and usage of psychedelics to help people achieve that state of mind. It began with people who were having troubles with addiction or depression, or, as we're going to talk about today, a fatal disease, like a cancer. And these trials were used to help, for those patients, help them deal with impending death. We're going to focus on that today. That's why the name of this particular episode is Life After and the Spirit Molecule. We're going to talk about the research that's been done and how the usage of psychedelics has enabled those who are facing death to understand it better, and those who are curious about what it is to explore that. So we're going to hear two stories, and whenever we talk about things like life after life and death, it's always tricky because not everyone believes that there's a life after life. Many people believe that this is all you get, and after you die, that's it. Molecules go in the ground, energy leaks out of you, you're done, nothing else happens. And no interest or explanation about what happens to your consciousness. Because science, as we know it, traditional science doesn't even know what consciousness is, hasn't even really acknowledged that it exists. So they certainly can't even begin to even make an attempt at a theory about what happens to consciousness after the body goes, because they're not sure consciousness exists when the body is here, other than the very physical idea of consciousness, that is, being awake and aware. But the idea of consciousness, of knowing yourself, having self-reflection, and all of those things is something that has been beyond the pale for traditional science, and honestly, they haven't had much interest in it. But there are branches of science, of course, that we talk about all the time that deal with these issues. So I chose two stories to tell to help us deal with this. Two stories from two different gentlemen. One comes from the Michael Pollan book that we've been talking about a lot on this show, and reading excerpts from on how to change your mind. He really has done a rather exhaustive look at the research that's been done, past, present, and future, on using psychedelics to teach us about consciousness, dying, addiction, depression, and transcendence. So it's a fascinating book. I highly recommend it, and I've been looking at the different topics. There's so much in it that I can't possibly cover it on my show, but it certainly connects to a lot of things we've been talking about for a long time on this program. So one is a story that comes from that book about a man who volunteered for the cancer trials at NYU, and this is an experiment they did at NYU using psilocybin to help cancer patients who were struggling with their impending passage, their impending death. And this is one of those men who was a volunteer in this cancer trial and has had a rather remarkable journey using the psychedelic treatment in this trial. And the other is a man in Los Angeles who is part of a group of people that uses a drug called DMT, also known as the spirit molecule. It's actually plant-based chemical that is found in ayahuasca. You may have heard of this particular psychedelic sacrament, which is what it really is, from South America, and how it changes people's lives. It's used for ceremonies. It's used for shamanism, to help those who wish to experience other realms, if you will. So there is this subculture of people in Los Angeles who use this DMT to experience the sensation of death almost recreationally, in a way that helps them to profoundly experience their life more deeply. Now, I have to warn you that now the trials, of course, that we're talking about are all done within a clinical context. So they have, all of the clinicians and all of the researchers have permission to use psychedelics. But DMT, however, and the DMT groups who use them are not clinical experiments. They're not researchers. They do not have permission from the government to use these drugs, and I just have to warn you that they are still illegal in most places, according to the United States government. And so I am not in any way encouraging people to purchase these drugs. I'm not in any way even advocating for their use, other than in a clinical environment in which people are safe and all legal and moral steps have been taken to protect the experiencer, if you will. So I am not at all advocating for you to purchase illegal drugs, but I just want to talk about these experiences that these two men have had in different ways of dealing with death. Now, the commonality between the two is what I wanted to talk about. These two men are very different in most ways. The first one, a gentleman by the name of Patrick Metis, who was involved in the NYU psilocybin cancer trials, was an established journalist who discovered he was, dying of cancer, and he and his wife struggled to come to grips with that knowledge. This other gentleman, a gentleman by the name of Daniel DiPiazza, is not dying. He does not have a terminal disease, but he is intrigued by the idea of experiencing the sensation of death, what it means. The commonality between the two is that neither one of these men are particularly religious people, and that's why I thought both of these stories are interesting to tell. They had no real belief in an afterlife. They have no real belief in a God or anything like that. But both came to have it through these journeys that they took involving psychedelics. So we're going to talk about these guys. And if there's time, we'll have a few more wellness tips for you to help you in your wellness journeys. I know sometimes I often don't get to the wellness part of the Spirit and Wellness show, but we focused on that for the past couple of weeks. So, and getting some nice response from those who've listened and gotten some information they could use. So I'm glad to provide that. Hopefully, we'll have some time to talk about those later. But first, let's talk about this first gentleman, Patrick Metis. He was the man who took the